Using the sustain pedal and using it well is really something that can help you take your chord playing to the next level, make it sound a lot more full, more professional, more musical and expressive, help you sound more like the songs that you're listening to that you want to sound like yourself. But be warned, because the pedal in the wrong hands, or the wrong feet I guess, can actually make your playing sound a bit off. So we'll cover everything you need to know as a beginner, how to use it properly, the mistakes that you might be making that most of us have made, and take a look at some fun musical things that you can try out with the pedal straight away. If you're not sure, the sustain pedal allows us to let go of the notes we're playing, but they continue to ring out as if we're still holding them down. It sustains the notes. When you press down the sustain pedal, it catches any notes that you're already holding, as well as any notes that you play afterwards whilst the pedal is still down. Then when you lift the pedal, the sound of all those notes disappears, unless you're still holding them down with your fingers. If you're playing on an acoustic piano with 2 or 3 pedals, the sustain pedal is the one on the right hand side. That's the only pedal we're looking at in this video. And of course, on a digital piano, we need to plug one in. You want to make sure you've got one like this and not one of these, because they're just not very good. They're hard to use properly and control properly. And you do need to make sure you get the right one, because not every pedal works with every brand of keyboard. Sometimes they can work backwards unless they've got a switch on them. The easiest thing to do is to just brand match, or if you want a slightly cheaper option, I've put a link in the description for a good universal sustain pedal. I would avoid just getting the cheapest random brand one that you can find, because sometimes the feel of it and the sensitivity can be a little bit clunky, and that's quite important. Let's listen to what the pedal can do to our sound, even just on one chord when we're playing a rhythm. So without the pedal, every time I lift up the chord, the sound disappears. But with the pedal held down the whole time, everything sounds smoother with a kind of spacey feel to it. There's no gaps in the sound. Every time I lift the chord up and down, it has a connected sound. But now we want to be able to create that effect whilst we're changing chords. So here we need to know a little bit more about how to do it properly. And this is where often people who first try it go wrong. Don't worry if that's you, we've all done it. It's a learning curve. So when we play chords, we often need to lift up and move around the piano to change to the next chord. And inevitably, that creates big gaps in the sound where we have to lift up and move to the next position. With the help of the pedal, we want to get the sound of the first chord and the next chord as close together as possible, so the transition sounds seamless. The first mistake people sometimes make is just to keep the pedal down the whole time whilst you're changing chords, which, as you can hear, sounds like a bit of a mess, because we don't want to hear all those chords at the same time. We want to use the pedal on every chord, but we need to lift it up and put it back down as the chords change. And the secret sauce to making this sound great is the timing. Now, 2 things can go wrong. You can lift the pedal a little bit too late, which can overlap the sound of the chords and make it sound a bit blurry. But the more common mistake everyone makes is to do this, and that's lifting the pedal at the same time as you lift to change chords, which, as you can hear, still leaves us with that gap in sound between the chords and kind of defeats the object of using the pedal. It's often a coordination problem, but we can practice to work on the correct coordination. What's happening is it's easier for our brain to lift our foot at the same time as we lift our hand in the same direction, like that. It's almost like you've got strings on your fingers pulling your foot up, but we need to cut those strings. What we need to practice is moving our hand and our foot in the opposite direction. As our hand comes down to the new chord, that's when our foot goes up as we're playing the next chord. So we need to practice this opposite motion. You can do that without actually touching the piano first. If you get that motion, that's going to be helpful. So when you're playing chords with the pedal, you need to leave your foot down whilst your hand lifts up to change chord, and then your foot comes up as you play the next chord, like that. So we've got that opposite motion, okay? The hand comes down and the foot goes up. The hand comes down and the foot goes up. Let me do all that again. So you're on the first chord, keep the foot down whilst the hand lifts up to change chord, and then the foot comes up as you play the next chord. And then we need to get the foot back down on that chord. As long as you're still holding that chord down, we don't need to be quite so precise about the timing of that, but I recommend just putting your foot back down straight away. It will take a little bit of practice to get the feel of that, get the coordination feeling natural. Let me show you how to practice it. The first thing is that you want to make sure you're playing the pedal by pivoting from your heel like this. Try and avoid lifting your whole leg up like that. And in order to make that comfortable, you need to be sitting far enough back away from the piano, because if you're too close, you get your foot in that position and it's really hard to lift your ankle up, it hurts and you've got no control. So you want to make sure you're sitting far enough back. As I've said in other videos, you want to be sitting on the front half of your stool as well. Don't overthink it, you just need to find that sweet spot where it's comfortable and controlled to lift your foot up and down. I'm going to just give you one simple exercise to practice to start with. I think it's really important to get this fundamental coordination and timing before trying to use the pedal whilst playing anything else more complicated. We're just going to go back and forth between two chord positions. We're going to use C major and G major. We're just going to go back and forth. And the reason I've chosen two positions with a leap in between them is because when you don't use the pedal, the sound of the gap is far more obvious. If you use a close moving position at first, you can get the sound quite close anyway, so you might not quite realise whether you're using the pedal properly. Yeah, it just makes it a bit more obvious. So using those two positions, I'm going to put the pedal down on the first chord, leave it down, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. And you can practice like that until that coordination feels comfortable. Make sure that you're always listening carefully to what you're playing. A lot of beginners are so focused on looking at their hands, they forget to listen, because your ears are going to tell you whether you've got that sounding correct or whether it still sounds gappy or whether the chords sound overlapped. And you're going to have to think about that quite a bit to start with, but you do it enough times and make it a habit, and it's one of those things that eventually becomes automatic and you'll do it without thinking. You can practice that with a bass note for each chord as well, just the root of each chord, C and G. And you're not going to do anything different with the pedal. It's just one more thing to think about with your left hand is all. And then you can try this out on a longer sequence of chords. Choose something that you're familiar with finding the positions to. If you're not sure what to do, we can just choose some easy positions to leap around, because our focus is on the pedal, not on the actual chords that we're using. So you can try this: C major, A minor, D minor, G major, C major. And you can loop that around and around. I'm only using root position chords there. It's not how we'd actually play. I'm just using easy positions for the purposes of an exercise where our focus is on the pedaling. Once you've started getting that coordination, you've got a feel for using the pedal, then you can start having a bit more fun with it. The great thing is that if we're playing some kind of pattern on the chord, we can just use the pedal in the same way as we did. We just need to lift it as we change to the new chord, even though we're playing something more complicated with our fingers. Whatever you're doing, you already know the notes in that chord are going to harmonize well together, so we don't mind hearing them all ring out with the pedal. Or doing a similar thing whilst changing chords, I'm just going to lift the pedal as I land on the new chord. The pedal allows us to stack up the sound of different notes, so that works really well when we move around different positions, even on one chord. We We can do that whilst breaking the notes up as well. Without the pedal, that would sound like this. So you can hear how powerful it is, the kind of thing it really allows us to do. A cool thing you can do is, if you find a nice chord position, you can just shift that round multiple octaves. Or something softer. And of course, it sounds really nice to use with arpeggios. It's really nice when you're playing some kind of broken pattern, maybe in the left hand, so you get all those notes ringing out together. And again, I'm just lifting the pedal as I start the new chord. It's really useful when we need to play a low bass note up to a chord position. I'm playing a melody with that example, but it just so happens that all the notes in that melody sound nice whilst ringing out through the pedal, but that won't always be the case. The next thing to think about are situations that come up a lot where we might be using other notes as well as the main notes in the chord. This might be like a melodic fill over the top of the chords, or sometimes we might be playing the whole melody with the chords. By the way, I've got a video coming soon on some different ways that we can play chords with a melody. A great example of this would be the piano part to Imagine, where we've got a little fill in between the chords. So as we start the first chord, it's just chord tones, they all work nicely together, and then we add on this B. Now that still fits nicely with our C chord, actually makes a C major 7. So that harmonises well, that all rings out together nicely in the pedal. Then we change chord, so we change the pedal. All good here. But when we play this fill, this one doesn't work, because listen, if we keep the pedal down, we're going to get that really clashy sound. So the way you'd want to do this is like this. You keep the pedal down on this chord and you lift it as you play that little riff. And then you can put the pedal back down as you land on the next chord position. But the way to make that sound a little bit nicer is like this. When you get to that point, lift the pedal but leave your left hand fingers down. So you've got some notes from the chord ringing out as you do that. Otherwise, things like this can sometimes sound a bit empty. If you did it without doing that, it can sound very empty. Sometimes that's an effect you might want, sometimes it's not. So when it's not, you want to try and leave some chord tones down with your fingers. Another situation you'll come across is using grace notes. So if I was to play a C major chord, if I was trying to make it sound a bit more bluesy or a bit more soulful, I might use a grace note going to the E. So I might play E flat to E. So here, I'm going to put the pedal down just after I play the grace note. Otherwise, I'm going to get those two notes ringing out together. So you've got to be a little more precise with your timing here. Just after you play that one. It's a little trickier to get, but it's worthwhile practicing it if you want to go for this sound, because otherwise you'll end up with that, which you want to try and avoid. Another situation to watch out for is bass lines, or playing even short, simple bass fills. You've got to be careful with what you're doing. If you are playing a C chord to a G chord, and you wanted to use a bass fill to get there, like that, well, you'd want to lift the pedal as you played that little melody. Otherwise, you're going to create that sound. You've always got to be careful when you're playing extra notes that aren't in the chord. Sometimes they're going to sound good and sometimes they're not. Now, I've heard people say before, in the context of playing a melody and chords, that you just need to change the pedal every time the chord changes. Now, that will work sometimes, but not all the time. It feels like an oversimplification that's meant to sound easy and make it sound like a useful thing, but actually I think that's kind of unhelpful advice, because there's lots of situations where notes are going to start clashing. And if you've got that rule in your head, you might not correct it because you just think you're doing it right. With experience, you get used to what's going to work and what's not, and you can almost do it a bit more instinctively on the fly. But in the beginning, you have to listen and make those decisions. It's really important that you always listen to what you're playing. And there's going to be lots of trial and error involved as well. And that's a good thing, because that's how we learn. And through that process, that's how we build up that intuition. If we look at the very opening part to Life on Mars, let's listen to what it would sound like if I only lifted the pedal as the chords changed. Okay, so it doesn't sound horrendous, but we've got this part of the melody all caught in the pedal. Now the main problem there is we've got the third note of the scale and the fourth note of the scale clashing, which in this situation doesn't work very well, but we've also just got loads of notes close together, all ringing out together, and it just doesn't sound that great in this case. So what you would want to do instead is this. You can keep the pedal down here. These are fine ringing out together. You can change chord here, but I would wait to put the pedal back down until after I've done that. Then you can put it down. And then change it on that third chord. When too many notes stack up, sometimes things can start sounding blurry. As well as the mistakes we talked about earlier, sometimes beginners can use too much pedal. So you want to find those moments where maybe, even if the pedal does work, it's just not quite appropriate. Sometimes you want that cleaner, less spacey sound. One very quick last thing to say is that sometimes the rhythm or the groove of what you're playing means you actually want to lift the pedal and create that gap, or just not use it on a chord at all. If you were to play something like this, in that case, you want the gap between that and that. That's an important part of the rhythm. So you could have the pedal down here, just not use it there, and put it back down when you come back to the first chord. I hope that was helpful. Next up, you should watch this video, which is going to help you lift up and move your hand around the piano better to play more relaxed. And that's going to help you play more accurately and make less mistakes. Thanks for watching.